Thanks for joining us today in acknowledgement of NAIDOC Week. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. We acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the traditional custodians of our land, Australia. The Gadigal people of the Eora Nation are the traditional custodians of the area I'm coming from today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. I'm Laurie Weeks, one of the consultants in our government practice here at Talenza. For those of you who may not have worked with us before, Talenza is a recruitment agency focused on technology, digital and business transformation talent. Each month we deliver a webinar with the pure agenda of helping our clients overcome their big challenges and inspire them to take action. As NAIDOC Week approached, we had been contemplating ways to amplify the voices of our First Nations communities and spark meaningful conversations. One topic that interested many of you is Indigenised recruitment. Honestly, we don't have all the answers just yet, but we believe in transparency and continuous learning. And after speaking with members of our network, we discovered that many of you feel the same way. To go into this important topic, we are thrilled to host Leroy Ma, Managing Director of DIRA, for an engaging discussion. Leroy will not only share valuable insights, but will also address the questions that you and our community have submitted prior to this session. While we've had a number of questions submitted already, there still may be a chance at the end to cover off a few more. So we invite you to submit any burning questions you have about the Indigenised recruitment into the chat function. From speaking with you, we know you have plenty, and we're glad that Leroy is here to unpack them all. And with that, Leroy, I'll hand over to you. Introduce yourself and share a bit more about what brings you here today. Thank you.
Thanks, brother. Hello, everyone. Pleasure to be with you all during NAIDOC Week. As you can imagine, the calendar's jam-packed this week, so great to take some time out to share with you all and start this critical conversation. Now, before I acknowledge country, I just want to point out, as a bit of a disclaimer, we can't answer all the questions today. Today's session for me, hopefully, will just open the doorway for you to start to get more critical, start to think about ways in which you might engage, answer some of those questions that might have been sitting on your chest for a little while. But 45 minutes is nowhere near long enough. We barely scratch the surface in these short time periods. So please come in with realistic expectations as to what you're going to walk away with today. As Laurie mentioned, my name is Leroy Ma. I'm a Warramai Ngangiri man based in the lands of the Wonnarua, Darkinjung and Awabakal people in the Hunter Valley of New South Wales. I too would like to start by acknowledging country today. For all the country on which you're joining us from in this virtual setting, please know the name of the country on which you're joining us from, especially during this week. It's NAIDOC Week. And I acknowledge our elders' resistance. So one thing I like to do when I acknowledge country is I think about the reasons why we're here. So if racist policy was to win on the Australian continent, this conversation wouldn't be happening today. This room wouldn't be happening. The language of reconciliation, the language of social equity and social justice would not exist. For that, we must recognize that it is still a form of resistance, that our people did survive. Now we're in the era of social justice and social equity. So how are we going to transform the landscape and the foundations on which the Australian fabric was built, both economically, societally, and recruitment has a role to play in that. My elders, we talk about standing on the shoulders of giants. This year's NAIDOC theme is for our elders. Now, elders aren't people that are ancestors that we've lost. It's also people that are in rooms that you'll walk into, people that you'll cross paths with. They too are our leaders at the shoulders of the giants, and the giants are in the room. I acknowledge my elders today, especially for their fight and their plight. I come from second generation of stolen gen. My grandmother, Rosemary Wassa, my grandfather, Fred Ma, my dad, John Button, my uncle, David Ma. I come from a really strong stock of people that have been able to create the platform in which I'm just fortunate to walk in. So the only reason I'm here with you today is because they enabled it. So I acknowledge that, and I acknowledge all of your elders. Eldership is not just a concept in our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, but in all communities. So please acknowledge your elders, learn from them, listen to them, create time for them, as their immense learnings will change the trajectory of your life forever. Today's pretty critical. It's always an interesting opportunity to talk to myself on a screen and not see who I'm working with. So this conversation today, again, like I said, is just going to open the door. Now, we're going to talk about Indigenised recruitment, right? So my background was 7 years in banking and finance from a young kid as a school-based trainee. So a recruitment program birthed me. Before that, I had no intentions, no deliberate intentions of what I wanted to do, except all I knew that I wanted to do was to break the cycle. I'm the oldest of a generation. I've got 12 siblings and countless cousins. So I have a cultural obligation to lead by example and to create pathways for people. So part of what I had to do was figure out what does that look like. Now, I started at CommBank, as I said, at 15 years old. So a young kid jumping into an opportunity. Ended up spending 7 years of my life with CommBank. I thought my blood bled black and yellow for most of that time. And then I took a leap of faith out to work in the Aboriginal employment not-for-profit sector with the Aboriginal employment strategy and finished up my career there as the head of people and culture. Now, 4 years ago, I jumped out into business. I birthed this company called Dira, my first little baby. Dira's initial MO was to transform the policy landscape, so to transform HR, which is the binding rules, the playbook around how Aboriginal people exist inside of mainstream organisations. For me, there was a parallel. There was a juncture that just was not cognizant of one another. Now, the ways that Aboriginal organisations run HR, run people functions, was innately different to the way that mainstream organisations ran them. So I thought there's a bit of magic in the synergy. How do we explore that together? It wasn't until people didn't get that there was an opportunity or a problem that we had to branch out into that dirty C word of consulting. So now we're in the consulting era where we're teaching the problem and teaching the opportunity. And I'll talk a little bit more about what my company does before we wrap up, in case any of you have any questions or want to get involved any further. But jumping into this recruitment landscape, we do a lot of the strategy work. So we don't do the recruiting. We do the strategy work behind enabling the action to take place. So we'll talk through a couple of the foundational elements as to what is required for Aboriginal recruitment and Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander recruitment strategies to really live. Now, when we think about strategy, there's a couple of layers to it. So we talk about how we're going to get people to the door. So what does it mean? How is our employer brand noticed? And what are the synergies between our brand, our intentions, and the Aboriginal people and communities in which we're trying to reach? So the attraction component, what is our Aboriginal employee value proposition, which may be a form of our employee value proposition more generally? What are the safety and support mechanics that we offer and afford Aboriginal employees is really critical. So for you working with agencies and organisations in which you might recruit for, these are some of the questions that you should be asking. What is the Aboriginal employee value proposition? If you are going to do targeted recruitment, then what does that look like? Are we identifying positions? Are we targeting them? What do you then afford Aboriginal employees? Do we have access to Aboriginal employee networks, culturally safe and responsive Aboriginal employee assistance programs? Do we have specific cultural leave embedded in our policy library? Do we have like-for-like service, or is this Aboriginal hire one of very few in the organisation, meaning the cultural load is going to be a mass consideration for this individual that's going to join your organisation? Some of these things we have to go through. So I call it getting our kitchen in order. We have to get our house tidy before we welcome new guests, which means that we have to figure out what the nuances are, those subtle differences in the ways of doing, being, and thinking between creating true value and true meaning for Aboriginal employees to work successfully in organisations. Now, we can lean back into the recruitment practices. There are nuanced differences. How we create job adverts, the language we use, the imagery, the platforms in which we might choose to share job adverts. If we are going to go through to mainstream platforms, are we building relationships with communities, which is going to be the agitator of all the local community talent? What is the long burn and slow burn principles? Are we creating pockets of talent in regions, in specific specialties? Have we got emerging fields in which Aboriginal people have mass underrepresentation? What does it look like in terms of strategy landscape? From then going into recruitment practices, how do we interview someone? How do we assess an application whilst factoring in unconscious and conscious biases? What does relationship mean? How do we develop relationship? What are the subtle nuances that we might miss in an interview? Where interviews, and one that we talk about quite often, is a paradigm of silence. Silence for some Aboriginal people and communities is not a bad thing. Silence means I'm deeply considering what you're saying, trying to curate the right response. But in an interview where we like sharp, hard, and fast responses, we're looking at the cognition component. Are they cognizant of what's happening in the room? Are they not sure how to answer? We might deem that a negative. So one thing we must be truly and really focally conscious of is not dismissing cultural nuance as a negative just because we don't understand it. That's not specific to Aboriginal people. That's specific to all people. How do we work with neurodivergent communities? How do we work with non-English speaking communities, Asian Australian population, the Indian Australian population? What are some of the subtle nuances in which we might need to factor to truly be a diverse or to offer a diverse recruitment practice? I'm not going to go through all the data sets. So some of the data sets will help you understand, and I'd encourage you to have a look at census data to look at where some of those closing the gap priorities are around Aboriginal kids completing high school through to average household income, employment rates. There's a story that you'll be able to see through a bit of a system which looks like cyclical oppression. where we can't complete school, which means that if we're applying for a job with 100 other applicants and we haven't completed a HSC or equivalent experience, and what's the one thing that's going to get culled? We're going to lose out some of our mass population. But is that choice? I share a video called The Race of Life. If anyone hasn't seen the Race of Life video, I encourage you to go watch it or take that a note to go watch it. It'll talk to you about the starting position of people. So how people might have to start, where they start through no fault of their own, versus then the hurdles that they have to climb and have to reach before they can get to a stage of equity to the nearest partner. We are in the equity era. We're not talking about equality-based recruitment. We are talking about equity-based recruitment, which means that our frame has to be, why are we providing, in kind of common language, we'll hear dispensation. We'll hear, we're accommodating unique needs. We're creating special entry pathways. These are just equity-based because we are not at a stage of equity. I believe we're generations from equity. So my lens right now is all based in equity-based approaches. I'll share with you a quick component before I hand back over to you, Laura, because I'm really keen to get involved in some of the questions. And I encourage you again, if you have got questions, please chuck them in chat. Don't be ashamed. This is 45 minutes where you only get out of it as much as you put in. So please ask away. There's a spectrum that I talk about, which is now these are coined terms. So these are research and theoretical terms, but there's a white savior complex and a white fragility complex. So if you haven't read them by definition, I encourage you to go have a look. Essentially, to break this down into really clear terms, so the saviorism complex is about when we've got people that are just acting without knowing what they're acting on. So we're doing it because it feels right. There's language in the definition which talks about in a self-serving manner. So white people helping non-white people in a self-serving manner means that I feel good, I gain. I might get employer credit. I might be doing it because government's telling me to do so as part of this new contract or new requirements of contract delivery. That stuff is in the saviorism landscape. So we're doing it for value. We're doing it for return. We're doing it not because we think we should be doing it, but we're doing it with limited exposure, limited experience, and there's no one guiding us on it. Now, the saviorism complex has risk. It means that we might act in a way that is going to create irreparable damage for our brand. We might have the right intention, but deliver it catastrophically because we didn't consider the nuances of the way that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people operate. So the saviorism complex is the one where you put the horse before the cart. It's just going. You slap the horse and it's running, and you're just doing things based on logic, but not on deep consideration of cultural differences. On the other side of the spectrum is fragility. Now, fragility is the component that absolutely paralyzes you. It's the one that goes, I don't feel comfortable to recruit Aboriginal people because I don't know what to think. I don't know how to relate. I don't know how to talk to them. I don't know what that means. I don't want to be seen as racist. I just don't feel safe and engaging. So fragility is when your heart rate goes up. You start to get a bit clammy. You start to kind of freak out a little bit. Fragility can be a good thing. Fragility can be that mental check to go, hang on a minute. Do I need to take a step back? Have I not considered something? And who can also support me on this? What critical friends do I have? And who can I call on to support me here? So that complex is a really tricky one to navigate, but I'd like to give it to you so you can name it. So you can go, do I act in a saviorism way where I'm just doing what I do, but we're just trying to make it black? Or I'm operating in the fragility landscape where I just don't know what to do, so I'm not doing it at all. We're just avoiding the question. So avoidance does not get us anywhere. And fragility typically is the ultimate hinderer of progress. It'll absolutely stifle innovation. So I'll leave you with those couple of concepts, race of life and the white fragility complex and white saviorism complex, just to get your head around how some of these systems empirically might be interacting or interfering with our progress in Aboriginal recruitment. But I'll be quiet now to hand back to Laurie to ask me some questions, eh? Let's get the yarn underway.
Yeah, cheers, mate. Thanks so much for that. Look, we'll kick it off. Look, I'd also ask the audience, please, any questions, please put them into the chat function. Thanks, and I'll ask them at the end. First up, so Leroy, what does Indigenised recruitment mean? Why don't they use the term Indigenous? Yeah,
well, that is me. So Indigenised recruitment was made by me. So that's one of our training programs. So we call this, it's the indigenization process. It's not formal language. You won't find it in the Merriam-Webster dictionary. It is language that I've created. So and other people are using. I probably wasn't the first person to use Indigenised. But it is about the indigenization of the concepts. So all the work we do in terms of strategy landscape, in terms of doing something, we're just indigenizing it. We're going, how does this fit the unique needs of Indigenous populations, which is a global conversation. So that's why it's called Indigenised Recruitment, because it mirrors my training package. So it's not formal language; it still is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander recruitment practices and principles. But yes.
Okay. And look, what are some of the ways companies can avoid unconscious bias in job descriptions?
There's no short answer. A lot of it is you need to have the right people guiding the work. So let's consider, I spoke a little bit before about nuance. So let's consider that you need someone to be able to vet your work. So one of the things that we do is we evaluate HR policies. So we evaluate the policy library to look for the cultural considerations that might not be there. Or if they are there, how do we strengthen them? How do we kind of modernize them to the current needs and the unique needs of this ever-evolving conversation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander affairs? Now, one of these components is I'll typically say to corporate clients, who did your last evaluation to identify cultural barriers? And they'll often say, we did. And I say, by we, was there an Aboriginal person involved in the evaluation? And they'll respond, no. So for me, it's, am I vetting my own work? If I can't see nuance, and consider nuance as a horse with blinkers, right? We can't see over here the peripherals there. I literally cannot see. I can't touch. I can't comprehend nuance because it is a subtle difference that I can't pick up on. I don't understand the value of. We talk about different ways of doing, being, and thinking. This is the same concept. If I can't spot nuance, how do I fix it? So the only real way to combat bias inside systems that we're going to create and then promote outward is going to be having Aboriginal critical partners partner with you to develop content, to proof content. So that's part of the evaluation work, which we deliver. But if you've got critical friends in your sphere of influence, if you've got Aboriginal cultural advisors that work with your organizations, have that right sphere of people that can guide you as a reactive and proactive measure. But that's probably the only way to assess the bias, is to have a case-by-case assessment of it. But some of the things that we'll typically look at is language, framing, but also more broadly in the recruitment principles, what is the ideal candidate profile? So that's one thing we talk about a lot in terms of Indigenous recruitment is we go, what is the ideal candidate profile and does it fit the mold? Are we looking for a black version of the mainstream ideal candidate profile? Does that exist? If not, what do we need to consider to reframe and retrain our clients to go, well, if we want to hire Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, this is the talent pool, this is the interest area. You know, like we're doing work with one of our amazing clients who work in medtech and pharma. And we're going, we don't have representation in these fields. So we had to recreate the system of what does an ideal candidate profile look like to then consider how do we create that profile? So sometimes we have to make sure that the supply is going to meet the demand and not the other way around.
No, amazing. Thanks. Look, I think you may have touched on this one before, but look, well, what should I keep in mind if I or another employee is doing acknowledgement to country?
Yeah. So I'll be really clear. So there's two forms. So welcome to country is practice, it's ceremony. So welcome to countries will be delivered by an Aboriginal person of the country. So welcome to countries can't be performed by Aboriginal people of country. So I can't go to Sydney, to Gadigal land and welcome people. I can't go to Northeast Arnhem Land and welcome people. That's not my country. So welcome to country is only delivered by Aboriginal people of country, the traditional owners and the traditional custodians. Acknowledgements of country, everyone's responsibility. So one thing I spoke to you a little bit before about is cultural load. I'd encourage you to look up the definition of cultural load so you can get your head around what that means. Cultural load applies a lot in meeting rooms when the only Aboriginal employee or the only Aboriginal person there is the direction of where the chair will go. And I'd like to pass you to welcome us today or to acknowledge country. Acknowledging country is something that is done by everybody. It is not a script. It is not a baseline template of where you just go the standard script. It's something that we encourage you to personalize, to have a yarn. What have you learnt? What is your current take? Why do you acknowledge country? What does it mean to you? Share that with people. Not making sure that acknowledgements of country are not over delivered. If you're running an event and you're hosting an event, every single speaker acknowledging country becomes somewhat of an exercise where people are going, what is going on here? But I encourage you to set the principles, set the foundations, and set the protocol. How do you engage acknowledging country? But it is everyone's responsibility. So understand what it is, understand what we're acknowledging and why, and then figure out how do you promote through cultural protocols learning and unlearning your people so that they feel comfortable in it. They will feel fragile. That's a component of fragility. We see people get paralyzed by, I don't want to say the name of this country wrong. Try and say Nganjiri. Hard word to say. People are going to freak. Sometimes giving it a go is okay, but also if you don't know how to say it, acknowledge that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how to say the word. I'm going to give it my best crack. If I'm wrong, I apologize. And I'd love to learn. But acknowledgement of the country for everybody, not just for Aboriginal people in the room. So please don't pass it on to them.
Yeah, I love that. Look, what would you recommend employers do to take the lead and improve employment prospects for Indigenous people?
Ask that one again.
What would you recommend employers do to take the lead and improve employment prospects for Indigenous people?
Yeah. So the employer profile is the side that I work on. So I work on the strategy work. Employers must be able to enter into that strategy landscape to figure out what is their contribution. So we're now in the era of social justice globally. We've got a lot of interest. Our allyship is at an all-time peak. People have got a very good social conscience, and a lot of corporate organizations have got this idea and this identity that aligns with being a good corporate citizen. Now, to do it well, we have to be able to follow the Aboriginal-led co-design principles, which means that Aboriginal people are authoring and co-authoring what their intentions are and what is going to be for them. So strategy landscape is for me, the only way in which Aboriginal employment truly works. For smaller organizations, it doesn't need to be really considered strategy. It just needs to be strategy where we've done our due diligence and understanding what is the current landscape. What don't I know? Now, to this, I will raise something that I talk to in every single sector that I work across. Now, this point is also for your clients. It's for you. It is that in some conversations, when we sit at a table, we might become an apprentice. So whether we're a clinician, if I'm a surgeon, if I'm a doctor, if I'm a lawyer, there will be rooms that I enter in, and there will be tables that I sit at, and there will be cuppas that I share with people where I become an apprentice, which means I have to sit and learn. And excuse me, Alexa's doing a little thing here. So what that means for your clients is that how do they mobilize the work? So once it gets to your desk where they're saying we want to recruit people, before that, there should be a ton of consideration around policy landscape. What are we affording Aboriginal people? What is the right safe place in our organization for Aboriginal people to work? And what do I need to do to create assurances around that? So some of that pre-work has to be done around what is it that we're going to do to make sure Aboriginal people can participate properly in our organization, where we don't ask them for there to be a trade-off of my work obligations and my cultural obligations. Deeply understanding that Aboriginal people are not one homogenous group, especially in 2023. This spectrum of indigeneity is so complex, means that we have to look at place-based solutions. We have to be able to localize concept and localize action. Another component of that is that they have to have the right framing. So their intentions have to be designed. Their statements have to be designed well for you guys as the recruitment arms to be able to then execute on their ask. So it takes place in the rooms before it gets to the stage of recruitment. It's probably the simplest way that I can answer that. But encouraging your clients to think deeply about the ways in which they might engage with Aboriginal people, and also saying to them that just because we want to create an opportunity for an Aboriginal person to join your organization doesn't mean that we're factoring cultural safety. Remember, we have to get our house ready before we welcome new guests.
Yeah, amazing. Look, another question from one of our clients. What is the purpose of a reconciliation action plan or a RAP? At what point should a company have one? I work in a smaller company with 80 employees. We don't have a RAP. What do you suggest is a good next step?
Yeah, so Reconciliation Action Plan is governed by Reconciliation Australia. So this model has been around for more than a decade now, and this model has been the blueprint to mobilise corporate action. It has been the blueprint to say to corporates in Australia, how are you going to contribute? Now that model's evolved over time, meaning now smaller organisations can get involved. And there's a principal step which is quite easy to follow on their website to figure out how it works, but it works in a RISE model. So it works in Reflect, which is your first version of strategy, which means we're just reflecting. What are we doing? What aren't we doing? That's a bit of a stock take. What might be our sphere of influence? What might be our impact through procurement, through policy, through influencing our sector, through creating employment opportunities, through buying and supporting Aboriginal businesses, through partnering with communities. That helps you figure out what might be our prospects, what might be the part of the narrative that we jump on board. Now, reconciliation is not anyone's narrative individually. It's a shared narrative. So what is our contribution to the story? The next level of that is innovate. That's what they call you, to innovate the practices. Start to put it into action. If you're thinking about Aboriginal employment, start to mobilize strategy. Engage the consultants, do the work, engage with communities, start to build it up and start to pull the trigger on some of these things. Stretch is the next model in the RISE model. So stretch is then about stretching the impact. How do you grow the impact of the work that you've started to deliver over the past 3 years? You've figured out contributions. You've hired Aboriginal people. You've spent money with Aboriginal businesses. Now, how do we grow that impact? How do we do more? How do we create new things that we might not have considered before, that we might have been too fragile to consider, but now we're in a space where we get it. We've got good relationships and we're comfortable. Let's stretch it. And then elevate is reserved for those people that are making immense contributions. Elevate 2 has become a platform where Reconciliation Australia can now manage clients. So you would have seen, companies like Rio Tinto and Telstra had the Elevate status stripped from them when they did things that were in direct conflict of the reconciliation journey. However, reconciliation is one blueprint, right? So for smaller organizations, the RAP model still works, but for some small organizations, they choose to go down the path of just developing up their own strategy, their own engagement framework. What is it that we want to do? We really want to do with our limited resource, and we want to figure out how we get more Aboriginal people into our organization through, either specialized roles or kind of new to market roles. It's meaning that I haven't got a skill-based and sector-based hire, but I might be able to find someone that's green that I can bring into this industry and teach them. I might just want to figure out, how do I partner with local community? How do I really get in? And how do I start to create impact locally in things that aren't just about work and return on investment, but it's just about social conscience? Those things can too be done through strategy, but it doesn't need to be through the prescriptive format of RAP. Not to say that RAP isn't a good model. It's a great model. But sometimes it doesn't fit the needs of smaller organizations that might just be set out to do 1 or 2 things in the next 2 to 3 years. In which case, I'd encourage you just to reach out and find the right critical friends, have conversations, reach out to me, happy to put you in the right direction, but find the critical friends that you can have safe conversations with to go, how might we do this?
Yeah, amazing. Mate, look, is it appropriate to use video in the recruitment process for Indigenous people? And if not, what are some of the alternatives? Especially with remote roles these days.
Yeah, I mean, again, we have to consider localized and place-based solution. So if we're trying to, hire people on country in a remote community, we can't make the assumption that we're going to have stable internet connection, the right technology hardware to do it. It may be there, but also may not. That can also apply in city-based and metro regions. We can't assume that everyone has access to reliable internet. We can't assume that everyone has access to the right hardware to join a video link. It also depends on the type of recruitment that you're doing. Some of these principles don't work for all roles. One thing we talk about as a baseline principle in our training package is this paradigm shift between value and skill-based recruitment, where typically we're about 80% value, 80% skill-based. So tell me about a time when we're trying to assess the capability of a candidate, over to the 20% then of that values fit and that team fit. Do you fit the team? Do you fit the mold? Do you fit my comfortability as a leader to work with you? Am I comfortable? Will my team be comfortable? But also, do you align with our mission? Aboriginal organizations do it on its head. We flip it and we go, do you care about our mission? Do you care about our why? If you do, I can teach you how to do a job, but I can't teach you to care about it. So flip the 80-20 rule. That helps you also go, if we're trying to find the right people for the right job with the right connection to mission and value, the ways in which we recruit might be different. So how do we humanize and indigenize that construct of how we might engage people to get to the right core of the groups in which we're trying to recruit for? Does that make sense to you, Laurie? I can't ask the...
Yeah, definitely. Look, mate, look, what are some of the questions you wish that more organizations would ask about building equitable and inclusive recruitment processes?
One of the questions I'd love for more corporate organizations to figure out is, do we tell the right story between equity and equality? So do we manage the narrative for our people? That's something that's really critical, because we are in the era where people do say, why do Black people get so much? What Aboriginal people get so much? When we talk about those doorways and channels that we create for equitable approaches, but the thing we have to teach people is the difference between equity and equality. Still, people don't recognize what that looks like because I can't understand it from an innate sense of my being. I haven't experienced it, so I don't know. But all I know is what my logic tells me. My logic tells me that there's a differential here. Why are we focusing on Aboriginal people when diversity and inclusion tells us that there's all of these different types of groups that we have to cater to? Why do Aboriginal people get so much? The short answer to that is that we're operating on stolen land. We're making money on unceded lands. That we have to look at now the journey of reconciliation is reconciling the books, reconciling the narrative. We have to figure out first, how do we work with the first people of this country who are dispossessed to then figure out how that might affect everyone else. Not forgetting about them, but we have to figure out what is the MO that we teach our people as to why we do this with a specific focus beyond diversity and inclusion priorities. One of the other components to that question would be people asking questions around cultural safety and cultural responsiveness. So really deeply considering what does that framework look like. So I don't personally like the language of cultural safety. Once we give someone a safety strategy, I feel like some companies might have then license to say that we're a culturally safe employer for Aboriginal people. It's red flag for me. We can't do anything that's going to be one universal version of cultural safety for any one Aboriginal person. We have to be able to go, how do we build a responsiveness framework? So cultural responsiveness is what I deal in. And it's how do we teach organizations to respond to the unique and nuanced needs of individuals? So me as an Aboriginal person, I'm going to need something completely different to you than my cousin, than my sister, than brother that is on the other side of the coast, east coast to west coast, north to south. There's going to be nuances that we have to factor in. So organizations must be pliable enough to be responsive to the unique needs. So that's probably the biggest one I'd love people to consider, because all of this stuff is based on the ability to have the right foundations. We can't just set an aspiration to hire 100 Aboriginal people in the next 5 years, but they come in and they're having really, really bad experiences. That's not what we want. We want to create good Aboriginal employee experiences. We want to create good champions and advocates in community, which will do more brand work for you than any of your marketing channels will. Because if you heard of the Koori grapevine or the Aboriginal grapevine, it's faster than Facebook. The data sharing in that is just crazy. People know who you are before you get in the room, which means that Aboriginal people in communities that stand for your brand, that are advocating and championing you, are going to do that. So that's the marketing work that you can't buy.
No, amazing, mate. Look, we've got a question in the comments. What are some of the tips on identifying a culturally safe recruitment agency?
Some tips on identifying a culturally safe recruitment agency. Look, it's a tough one. You need to be able to have conversation. It's for me, it'd probably be asking about what are you doing, but also if we're trying to find a recruitment agency that's specifically trying to hire Aboriginal people, use an Aboriginal recruitment agency. They exist. Why can't we have like-for-like service? You know, we've now got Aboriginal doctors, lawyers, physios. We have the opportunity to go and buy like-for-like. So if you're trying to find and identify an Aboriginal recruitment firm that is going to be dealing in cultural safety and cultural responsiveness, I'd be trying to find an Aboriginal supplier. Would be my simple answer to that. Outside of that, it's very hard to dig beneath, I guess, what the pitch is that may come from any organization. Remember how I said before that license to say that I am the best. I am very culturally safe. I might think I am, but how do I know? So that's probably, short answer is use an Aboriginal recruitment firm.
Amazing. Look, Leroy, thanks so much for taking the time out today to speak with us for NAIDOC Week. I know, like you said before, you've got a really busy week ahead, mate. And look, I truly value having us here, and I guess really opening our eyes and bringing truth to what's ahead and what we do as a company. If there's no more questions, mate, look, thanks again. This session will be recorded. We'll send it out to everyone. And please, I do encourage you to get in touch with Leroy. Thanks, mate.
Amen. Thank you, everyone. It's been great.